I've been married to my wife for 8 years. We met young, built a life the slow, boring way, shared rent, shared groceries, shared plans about kids someday. From the outside, we looked solid. No dramatic fights, no obvious cracks. That's what made it so unsettling when things started to feel off. It wasn't one big red flag at first. It was a collection of small, irritating changes that didn't fit together. She started guarding her phone like it was a state secret. She'd smile at the screen, then snap at me for asking what was funny. Suddenly, everything I did annoyed her: how I chewed, how I breathed, how I existed in the same room. She'd accuse me of being controlling if I asked simple questions, like why she was coming home at midnight on a Tuesday. I told myself it was stress. Work, burnout, maybe I was imagining things. That's what you do when you love someone, you explain away the discomfort because the alternative feels too big to face. Still, there was this constant knot in my stomach, like my instincts were screaming and my brain kept telling them to shut up. The strangest part? She started rewriting our history in real time. Joking, half serious, about how we never really connected or how I used to be more confident. It felt like she was already distancing herself, emotionally packing her bags while still sleeping next to me. I didn't know it yet, but this was the calm before everything collapsed. Once I noticed the shift, I couldn't unsee it. Her schedule became a mess of vague explanations. Late meeting. Drinks with coworkers. I told you already. Except she hadn't. The stories never lined up, and when I tried to clarify, she'd roll her eyes and act like I was interrogating her over nothing. She also got mean in a way that felt strategic. Quick jabs disguised as jokes. Comments about how other men at her job were actually ambitious. If I looked hurt, she'd smirk and say I was being sensitive. It was like she needed me off balance, questioning myself instead of questioning her. One night, she came home smelling like a different cologne. Not hers, not mine. When I mentioned it casually, she didn't even hesitate, said it was from a coworker hugging her goodbye. She laughed while saying it, like the idea of anything else was ridiculous. That laugh stuck with me. It felt rehearsed. I started replaying conversations in my head, noticing how often she contradicted herself. She'd say she hated a guy from work, then casually mention grabbing lunch alone with him the next day. When I pointed that out, she snapped, accused me of keeping score, said this was why she felt trapped in the marriage. That word, trapped, hit hard. I hadn't changed. I hadn't cheated. I hadn't disappeared. Yet somehow I was being framed as the problem, the reason she was unhappy. I began doubting my own memory, my tone, my reactions. Looking back, this was when the lying stopped being defensive and started being aggressive. She wasn't just hiding something. She was actively building a version of reality where I wouldn't be believed when the truth finally came out. The anxiety became constant. I'd wake up already tense, like I was bracing for bad news that never fully arrived. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd tilt it away from me. Every time I walked into a room, conversations would end mid-sentence. She said I was paranoid. I started to wonder if she was right. Then came the night that flipped everything. She told me she was staying late again. Same flat tone, same lack of eye contact. I nodded, pretended I believed her, and went through the motions of a normal evening. But something in me snapped. Not anger, clarity. I didn't feel crazy anymore. I felt certain. Around 10, I checked our shared tablet. We rarely used it, but it was still synced to her accounts. I wasn't even looking for proof, I just needed reassurance. Instead, I saw a notification pop up. A message preview. Her name, followed by a heart emoji, from someone I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. The messages weren't subtle. No flirting wrapped in plausible deniability. Just familiarity. Plans. Jokes that only make sense when two people have already crossed lines. She called him baby. She never called me that. I sat there reading, scrolling, feeling this heavy pressure in my chest, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The timeline was worse than the words. Weeks. Maybe months. All those late nights suddenly had faces, voices, intent. The worst part wasn't the sex, though that image burned. It was realizing how calmly she'd been lying to my face while this was happening. How easily she'd watched me doubt myself. In that moment, the marriage I thought I had ended quietly, without drama, on a glowing screen in my hands. Once the door was open, everything poured out. I kept scrolling, even though every part of me wanted to throw the tablet across the room. There were photos. Not explicit, but intimate enough to leave nothing to the imagination. Her smile in those pictures was one I hadn't seen in months, relaxed, playful, like she wasn't constantly irritated by my existence. I checked timestamps. Cross-referenced them with nights she'd kissed me goodbye and told me she loved me before working late. One message mentioned our bed. Another joked about how clueless I was. That one landed like a punch to the throat. Then my phone buzzed. A text from her, running late. Don't wait up. The timing felt almost cruel, like the universe was mocking me. I screenshotted everything. I don't know why, instinct, maybe survival. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation, some context that would make this less devastating. But every new detail only made it worse. She wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She was organized. When she finally came home after midnight, I didn't confront her right away. I watched her move through the apartment like nothing was wrong. She kicked off her shoes, complained about her day, asked why I was still awake. Her normalcy was terrifying. As she talked, I realized something important: she had rehearsed this life. The lies weren't spontaneous. They were polished. And I was the only one in the dark. I went to bed without saying a word, tablet locked in the drawer, heart racing. I knew once I spoke, there was no undoing it. And even though I already knew the truth, part of me was still mourning the version of her I thought I was married to. I didn't sleep. By morning, my body felt hollow, like I'd been drained overnight. She woke up cheerful, humming while making coffee, completely unaware, or pretending to be. That casual confidence finally snapped something in me. I asked her, calmly, who he was. She froze for half a second. Just half. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. Told me I was being weird, asked where this was coming from. I told her I saw the messages. The photos. Everything. I expected denial, maybe tears. Instead, her face hardened. First lie, she said I invaded her privacy and that was the real betrayal. Second lie, she claimed it was just flirting, nothing physical. Third lie followed immediately after. She said it only happened once, and it didn't mean anything. When I mentioned details she hadn't told me, specific jokes, dates, places, her story shifted again. She rolled her eyes, called me dramatic, said I was twisting things to play the victim. Somehow, within 5 minutes, I was the bad guy for creating a hostile environment. She blamed my work hours, my emotional distance, my lack of ambition. She said she felt lonely, unseen, like I pushed her into someone else's arms. No apology. No accountability. Just a list of my supposed failures, delivered with that same smug tone she'd been using for weeks. That was when the anger finally arrived. Not explosive rage, cold, sharp clarity. I realized she wasn't sorry she cheated. She was sorry she got caught. And even then, she acted like I owed her understanding. Standing there, listening to her rewrite reality in real time, I understood something painful and final: the woman in front of me was not on my side anymore. After the confrontation, something inside me went quiet. The yelling I thought would come never did. She stormed out of the kitchen, slammed a door, and spent an hour on the phone, probably with him, probably painting herself as the victim. I just sat there, staring at the table, feeling oddly detached from my own body. The anger faded fast, replaced by a heavy numbness. Like my system had overloaded and shut down to protect itself. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept going. Cars outside. A neighbor laughing. My life had just cracked in half, and nobody noticed. She came back eventually, arms crossed, expression annoyed rather than remorseful. Said she needed space and that maybe we should take a break. As if this was a mutual disagreement, not a bomb she'd dropped on our marriage. She grabbed a bag, told me she was staying with a friend. Didn't say which one. The door closed, and the silence that followed was brutal. I walked through the apartment like a ghost. Every object felt charged with memory, our couch, our photos, the stupid mug she bought me as a joke years ago. I felt embarrassed, like everyone else must somehow know I'd been fooled. That I was the last person to see what was happening in my own home. I cried for the first time that afternoon, sitting on the floor, back against the bed. Not loud sobbing, just this steady leak of grief I couldn't stop. I wasn't crying over her anymore. I was crying over the future I'd assumed was guaranteed. That night, I realized shock doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like being awake while everything meaningful slowly drains out of the room. The days after she left blurred together. She barely contacted me, except to ask where certain things were or when she could pick up more clothes. Each message was short, emotionless, like we were roommates ending a lease instead of spouses unraveling a life. When she did call, it was never to apologize. It was to justify. She said I was milking the situation. Said I was acting like a martyr. At one point, she even suggested that her cheating forced us to finally address our issues. The audacity of that almost made me laugh. Then the trickle of new information started. Mutual friends stopped responding to my texts. One of her coworkers, someone I barely knew, messaged me late one night, awkward and clearly uncomfortable. He didn't say much, but he confirmed what I already suspected: this wasn't a one-time mistake. People knew. For a while. That realization hurt more than the affair itself. I wasn't just betrayed by her. I was the punchline to a story I didn't know I was in. The humiliation sat heavy in my chest, mixing with anger and sadness until I couldn't separate them. I started replaying our entire relationship, searching for signs I missed. Every argument, every moment she dismissed my feelings, every time she called me insecure. I wondered how long she'd been preparing to leave while letting me believe we were still a team. By the end of that week, one thing became painfully clear: she wasn't coming back to fix anything. She was already gone. And the only person still clinging to the idea of us was me. A week later, she finally came by to pick up the rest of her things. She didn't come alone. She brought confidence with her, new clothes, new energy, like shedding the marriage had done wonders for her. She acted irritated, as if this whole mess was an inconvenience I was dragging out. She told me we should be civil. Said she didn't want drama. Then, in the same breath, she accused me of being emotionally abusive for checking her messages. According to her new version of events, the affair wasn't the problem, it was my reaction to it. She minimized everything. Said I was exaggerating. Said I didn't understand her needs. Said the guy she cheated with actually listens. That one cut deep, not because it was true, but because she knew exactly where to aim it. At some point, I realized she was performing. Not for me, for herself. She needed a narrative where she wasn't the villain, where she was brave for leaving and justified in betraying me. Watching her do mental gymnastics in real time was surreal. When I calmly asked if she felt any remorse at all, she scoffed. Said remorse wouldn't change anything, so why bother? Then she told me she hoped we could still be friends someday. I almost laughed in her face. After she left with the last box, the apartment felt lighter and emptier at the same time. I stood there, surrounded by silence, and understood something crucial: closure wasn't going to come from her. She was never going to give me the honesty I deserved. If I wanted peace, I was going to have to build it without her. Once she was fully gone, the collapse I'd been holding back finally happened. I wasn't functioning, I was surviving in fragments. I forgot to eat. Slept at random hours. Sometimes I'd just sit on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling this deep, aching emptiness I didn't know how to fill. Nights were the worst. That's when the questions came. Was I really that easy to replace? Did she ever love me, or was I just convenient until something better showed up? I'd scroll through old photos, punishing myself, trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything turned fake. The anger came back in flashes. Sudden, sharp thoughts about confronting the other guy, about exposing her lies publicly, about burning everything down the way she burned me. But the anger never lasted. It always collapsed into exhaustion and grief. I didn't tell many people what happened. Part of me was ashamed. Part of me didn't want the pity. And part of me still felt loyal to someone who didn't deserve it. That realization that I was protecting her even now made me feel pathetic. One night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I barely recognized myself. Hollow eyes. Slumped posture. I looked like someone who'd lost more than a relationship. I'd lost trust in my own judgment. That was my lowest point. Not the cheating. Not the confrontation. But the quiet moment when I realized how completely I'd let someone else define my worth and how much work it was going to take it back. At some point, I stopped trying to get answers from her. I realized every question I asked just gave her another opportunity to lie, minimize, or twist the knife. She never told the same story twice. The details shifted depending on what made her look best that day. So I blocked her number. That decision felt both terrifying and relieving. Terrifying because it made everything real. Relieving because the noise finally stopped. No more late-night texts that reopened wounds. No more sudden calls where she'd act friendly one moment and cruel the next. Without her voice in my ear, the fog began to lift. I started writing things down, what actually happened, what she actually said, so I wouldn't gaslight myself the way she had. Seeing it in plain words was grounding. Painful, but honest. I also made a rule for myself: I wouldn't stalk her online. No checking her profiles, no trying to see if she was happy, no comparing my grief to her freedom. Every time I broke that rule, it set me back days. What surprised me most was the shift inside my head. I stopped asking why she did it and started asking why I tolerated the warning signs for so long. That question hurt more, but it was the right one. For the first time since the discovery, I felt a small sense of control return. Not over the situation, but over myself. And that was the beginning of something new, even if I couldn't see what it was yet. With her gone and the silence settling in, I had to face something I'd been avoiding, myself. There was no distraction left, no chaos to react to. Just long days and even longer thoughts. I started doing small, practical things: cleaning the apartment, reorganizing drawers, throwing away items that carried too much weight. It felt symbolic, even if I didn't want to admit it. I reached out to a couple of people I trusted and finally said the words out loud. Hearing them come from my own mouth made the situation feel real in a different way. They didn't judge me. They didn't tell me what I should have done. They just listened. That mattered more than advice. I also began noticing how much of myself I'd shrunk during the marriage. How often I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. How many times I'd accepted disrespect because it was easier than confrontation. That realization stung, but it was honest. There were still bad days. Days when I missed the routine, the familiarity, even her. But I stopped romanticizing the relationship. I forced myself to remember the lies, the contempt, the way she made me feel small when I questioned her. Standing alone wasn't something I wanted. But slowly, I stopped seeing it as a punishment. It became a reset. A chance to rebuild without constantly doubting my reality. I didn't feel healed. Not even close. But for the first time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just bleeding in place. As weeks turned into months, I started noticing subtle changes in myself. Things that seemed small at first: I slept a little better, cooked meals I actually enjoyed, took walks without feeling guilty for leaving the apartment. Every little act felt like reclaiming space that had been occupied by her lies and her presence. I also picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned: reading, drawing, even going to a gym class I'd skipped for years. I realized I had been surviving in autopilot during the marriage, always accommodating her moods, her schedule, her needs. Doing things for myself felt radical. Dangerous, even, but also liberating. The hardest part was learning to trust myself again. Not other people, my own judgment. I replayed the affair in my head countless times, trying to find lessons, patterns, anything that could prevent me from being blind to red flags in the future. Some days, the memory made my chest tighten, other days it fueled determination. I also started noticing small victories, declining an invitation I didn't want to go to, saying no without guilt, standing firm in conversations without bending. It felt like I was building a backbone I'd lost somewhere along the way. I still thought about her. Sometimes with anger, sometimes with sadness, sometimes with numbness. But the frequency decreased. Slowly, the apartment, my life, was mine again. Not shared. Not manipulated. Just mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt powerful. One evening, I realized I wasn't constantly thinking about her anymore. Not because I'd forgotten, not because I'd forgiven, but because I'd stopped letting her control my thoughts. I could see my reflection in the mirror without flinching. My apartment felt like a home again, not a trap. I started making small plans for the future, weekend trips alone, reconnecting with friends I'd ignored, even talking about dating again in vague, careful ways. The idea of being vulnerable scared me, but it didn't paralyze me like it used to. I felt like I was reclaiming permission to live fully, without fear or shame. I also confronted something deeper, the anger. It was still there, sharp at times, but it had changed. It was no longer an uncontrollable surge that left me paralyzed or bitter. It became a quiet awareness, a guide reminding me what I wouldn't tolerate again. The turning point wasn't dramatic. No life-altering event, no sudden clarity. Just a morning where I realized I could enjoy my coffee without a knot in my stomach, could walk outside without replaying her lies, could think about my life without her shadow looming over it. That was when I knew I was finally moving forward. It wasn't freedom fully realized, but it was the first taste of it. And it was enough to keep me going. Looking back, I see so clearly now what I learned from this mess. The first lesson is brutal but essential: trust your instincts. Those little red flags I ignored for months weren't paranoia, they were signals. I just didn't want to hear them. The second lesson is about boundaries. I had let her behavior slide, justified it, excused it, rationalized it, all because I loved her. But love doesn't excuse betrayal. Accepting disrespect quietly only gave her permission to continue. I also learned the hard truth about closure: it doesn't come from the other person. She wasn't going to apologize, explain, or make amends in any meaningful way. Closure came from me, from processing, from reclaiming my life. Finally, I learned resilience isn't about never breaking down. It's about breaking down and still finding the strength to rebuild. It's about feeling hollow, exhausted, angry, and still showing up for yourself, day after day. These lessons were painful, and some will stick with me forever. But they also made me stronger, more aware, and more protective of my own life and heart. And I finally realized, that's something she'll never take from me again. Now, months later, I can finally breathe without the weight of her lies pressing down on me. I've started to plan for the future again, small steps at first, but intentional. I've reconnected with friends, pursued hobbies I'd neglected, and allowed myself to feel joy without guilt. I don't think about her every day anymore. When I do, it's less about anger and more about gratitude for the clarity her betrayal eventually forced me to find within myself. I've rebuilt my sense of self, my boundaries, and my ability to trust my own judgment. I know I'll carry scars from this, but they're reminders, not chains. They remind me what I endured, what I overcame, and what I won't tolerate again. The hardest part, accepting the reality and letting go, was also the most liberating. If there's any advice I could give to someone facing a similar situation, it would be this: trust yourself, set firm boundaries, and don't wait for the other person to change. Take your life back, piece by piece. It's painful, but it's also the start of something stronger than anything that ever existed before the betrayal. The chapter with her is closed. The next one, my own, is just beginning.